The morning I learned my husband had betrayed me, a federal notice was taped to the front door of my house. According to the document, I owed more than $200,000 on a business loan I had never applied for. My home had been used as collateral, my signature appeared on every page, and the payment was already 4 months overdue. The worst part was not the amount or the threat of foreclosure. It was the name printed beside mine. My husband, Daniel, had signed the documents as my business partner. At 39, I worked as a civilian logistics coordinator for the United States Army at Fort Eisenhower in Georgia. My job required accuracy, patience, and constant attention to details that most people ignored. I tracked equipment shipments, reviewed supply records, and made sure expensive mistakes were caught before they became disasters. Every day, soldiers and supervisors trusted me to notice missing numbers, incorrect dates, and suspicious changes. At home, however, I had ignored every warning placed directly in front of me. Daniel and I had been married for 3 years. He was confident, charming, and always seemed to have a plan for our future. After my first marriage ended, I had promised myself that I would never again confuse attention with loyalty. Still, Daniel made trust feel easy. He remembered small things, supported my demanding schedule, and treated my 14-year-old daughter, Ava, with a kindness that seemed completely natural. His latest idea involved opening a private transportation company near Atlanta. He claimed military contractors and medical suppliers constantly needed reliable drivers, secure storage, and fast delivery services. Because I understood logistics, he often asked for my opinion. I gave him advice, but I made one boundary clear from the beginning. I would not invest money, take out loans, or place my house at risk. That house was the only major thing I owned. I had bought it after my divorce using savings, a small inheritance from my mother, and years of careful budgeting. Ava had finally stopped asking whether we would need to move again. Our kitchen walls still carried pencil marks showing how much she had grown. 2 months before the notice appeared, Daniel brought home a folder filled with forms. He explained that the bank needed proof that I knew about the company because we were married. The paperwork looked routine, and most pages were covered with legal language I did not fully understand. After a 12-hour shift, my eyes were burning, my head hurt, and I wanted the conversation finished. Daniel had already marked the places where I needed to sign. Something about that bothered me, but he seemed calm and prepared. He reminded me that I reviewed complicated documents all day and suggested I was simply exhausted. Rather than admit that I felt uneasy, I signed 6 pages without reading them carefully. For the next several weeks, nothing appeared unusual. Daniel left early, returned late, and said the company was growing faster than expected. New suits appeared in his closet, along with his second phone he claimed was only for clients. Money seemed tighter, yet he insisted every new business struggled during the first year. Then the federal notice arrived. My hands shook as I read the attached property description. The loan was not connected to a transportation company in Atlanta. It belonged to a corporation registered in Nevada, and the mailing address was a condominium in Florida. That condominium belonged to a woman named Rachel Bennett. Beside her name, the document listed Daniel as her spouse. For several minutes, I stood on the porch holding the notice while cars passed quietly through the neighborhood. Nothing around me had changed, yet my entire life suddenly felt unstable. The lawn still needed watering, Ava's school backpack remained beside the stairs, and my coffee was getting cold on the kitchen counter. Meanwhile, a document in my hands claimed my husband was married to another woman. My first instinct was to believe there had been a clerical mistake. Army records contained errors, banking systems failed, and names were sometimes connected to the wrong accounts. I had spent years correcting problems caused by missing numbers and careless data entry. That explanation was comforting because it allowed me to avoid the more frightening possibility. Daniel might not be the man I thought I had married. Before calling anyone, I photographed every page and locked the original notice inside my desk. My training had taught me never to rely on one copy when important records were involved. After that, I searched the Nevada Business Registry using the corporation name printed on the loan. The company had been created 18 months earlier. Daniel and Rachel Bennett were listed as officers, while my name appeared as the financial guarantor. According to the filing history, several amendments had been submitted during the previous year. One of them included an address that matched my home in Georgia. Another described me as a founding investor, even though I had never attended a meeting or received a single company statement. The deeper I searched, the worse the records became. A commercial property near Jacksonville had been leased under the corporation's name. 2 delivery trucks had been financed through a separate lender. There was also an active lawsuit involving unpaid storage fees and damaged medical equipment. Every document carried some version of my signature, but several signatures looked slightly different from the one I remembered writing. That detail should have frightened me immediately. Instead, it made me angry. Daniel had known exactly how exhausted I was when he placed those forms in front of me. He had chosen a night after a long shift because he understood I would not examine every page. The documents I signed may have been mixed with others, or my signature may have been copied afterward. Either way, my trust had become a tool he could use. I called my supervisor and requested emergency leave without explaining the full situation. Then I contacted the lender listed on the federal notice. Because the account involved possible fraud, the representative refused to provide detailed information by phone. She confirmed only that the loan had been approved using my income, my property records, and copies of my identification. A chill moved through me when she mentioned the identification documents. Daniel had access to our filing cabinet, where I kept tax returns, insurance records, and an old photocopy of my driver's license. He also knew my work schedule, my social security number, and the name of the bank holding my mortgage. Nothing had been stolen from a stranger. Everything had been taken from inside my own home. By early afternoon, I had created a timeline across the dining room table. Credit statements, business filings, calendar notes, and screenshots covered the surface. Dates that had once seemed unimportant began forming a pattern. Daniel's business trips matched legal filings in Nevada and Florida. His unexplained absences lined up with payments made near Jacksonville. The second phone had appeared shortly after the largest loan was approved. Ava came home before I finished organizing the documents. I hid everything inside a locked cabinet because I could not let her see how frightened I had become. She already trusted Daniel like a father, and I had encouraged that relationship from the beginning. Later that evening, I checked our joint bank account. Nearly $27,000 had disappeared during the previous 6 months. The transfers were small enough that I had overlooked them, but together they formed a steady stream leading to the same Florida corporation. One final transaction caught my attention because it had been made that morning. Daniel had transferred the remaining balance to an account I could not access. For the first time, I understood that he was not preparing to fix the damage. He was preparing to leave. By the time Daniel came home, I had already decided not to confront him. Every instinct pushed me toward the front door, where I wanted to demand answers before he could take another step. However, years of working around military investigations had taught me something important. People who believed they were still trusted often revealed more than people who felt cornered. I cleared the dining room table, returned every document to the locked cabinet, and forced myself to behave normally. Daniel arrived shortly after 8, carrying takeout and wearing the gray jacket he usually saved for meetings. His expression was relaxed, but he kept one hand near the pocket holding his second phone. Nothing about his behavior looked accidental anymore. Throughout dinner, I watched him without appearing to study him. He barely touched his food, checked the time repeatedly, and avoided mentioning the business. Whenever Ava described her school day, he smiled at the right moments, yet his attention remained somewhere else. The performance was almost perfect, which made it more disturbing. Afterward, Daniel went upstairs and stayed in the shower longer than usual. I used those minutes to examine the jacket he had left over a chair. Inside the pocket, beneath a folded receipt, I found a parking stub from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The date printed on it was 3 days earlier. Daniel had told me he spent that entire day meeting suppliers in Augusta. A second receipt came from an airport hotel near the international terminal. The room had been paid for with a corporate card ending in 4 digits I did not recognize. Beside the total, someone had written an 8-digit number and the word departure. I photographed both receipts before returning them exactly where I found them. Sleep never came that night. Daniel lay beside me breathing evenly, while I stared at the ceiling and calculated how much time he might need to disappear. The emptied bank account suggested days, not weeks. If he had purchased airline tickets, he could leave before the lender finished processing my fraud complaint. Before sunrise, I drove to work and accessed only the records I was legally permitted to review. I did not search classified systems or use Army resources for personal reasons. Instead, I checked my own personnel file because the lender had mentioned copies of my employment information. A recent income verification request appeared in the system. It had been submitted using my personal email address and included an authorization form bearing my electronic signature. The request contained my exact salary, employment status, and office location. None of that information should have been available to Daniel unless he had entered my email account or copied documents from my home office. The discovery changed the situation completely. This was no longer only about my house. Fraud connected to my employment records could trigger an internal security review. Even if I had done nothing wrong, unexplained debt and possible identity misuse could affect my clearance, my position, and every professional relationship I had built. I reported the compromised account to our cybersecurity office and disclosed the financial fraud to my supervisor. Saying the words aloud made me feel exposed, but hiding the problem would have created more danger. Within an hour, my passwords were reset, my access history was preserved, and an investigator advised me not to delete anything from my personal devices. During lunch, I searched Daniel's home office. Most drawers contained ordinary invoices and office supplies. A locked metal box sat beneath the desk, but the key was nowhere nearby. Just as I prepared to leave, I noticed a loose floorboard behind the filing cabinet. Underneath it was a thin black folder. Inside, I found copies of my passport, tax records, property deed, military employment forms, and Ava's birth certificate. A printed itinerary showed 2 one-way flights to Cancun scheduled for the following Friday. Daniel's name appeared on the first reservation. Rachel Bennett's name appeared on the second. Behind the tickets was a handwritten list of account numbers, passwords, and estimated balances. My retirement account was included near the bottom, followed by a note indicating that the transfer was still pending. The final page contained something even worse. It was an application for a second mortgage on my house, dated only 4 days earlier, with an approval amount of $180,000. Daniel had not forgotten that file. He had hidden it because he planned to take everything before I realized what was happening. Finding the second mortgage application should have been the worst moment of that week, but the black folder contained one more envelope. It was sealed, unmarked, and heavier than the other documents. Inside were printed photographs, hotel receipts, insurance forms, and copies of messages between Daniel and Rachel. None of the messages were romantic. They looked organized, practical, and focused entirely on money. That frightened me more than love letters would have. Their relationship was not a secret affair that had grown out of control. They were partners in something planned long before Daniel entered my life. Every move had a date, every account had a purpose, and every risk had been calculated around my income, my house, and my military employment. One photograph showed Daniel and Rachel standing beside a delivery truck in Florida. The image had been taken 4 years earlier, nearly 12 months before I met him. Another showed them outside a courthouse holding what appeared to be a marriage certificate. Rachel was wearing a white dress, while Daniel had his arm around her waist. According to the date, they had never divorced. My marriage to Daniel had never been legally valid. For several minutes, I sat on the floor with Ava's birth certificate in one hand and that photograph in the other. The room felt strangely distant, as though I were watching someone else discover that her entire marriage had been staged. Daniel had studied me before he chose me. He knew I owned a house with substantial equity. My stable Army salary made me attractive to lenders, while my clean credit history made large loans easier to approve. As a single mother with a demanding job, I was also used to handling problems alone. He had not fallen in love with my strength. He had identified how to exploit it. A spreadsheet inside the envelope listed 6 women in different states. Beside each name were details about age, employment, property ownership, credit scores, and relationship status. 2 names had been crossed out. Another carried a note indicating that she had become suspicious too quickly. My name appeared near the bottom. Next to it, Daniel had written that I was financially stable, emotionally cautious, and likely to respond well to patients. He had also noted that my first marriage ended without infidelity, which meant betrayal was not the danger I expected. Reading those words felt like someone had reached into my private memories and turned them into instructions. The situation was no longer simply cruel. It was organized, repeated, and far more serious than I had imagined. Daniel and Rachel appeared to build relationships with women, gain access to their identities, borrow against their property, and disappear before the damage became visible. This was complete madness, yet every document made the pattern undeniable. I photographed the entire folder and contacted the investigator assigned to my report. Because the evidence suggested activity across several states, he instructed me to preserve everything and avoid alerting Daniel. Federal authorities would need time to verify the business records, travel plans, and identities of the other women. Returning the folder beneath the floorboard required more control than I knew I possessed. My hands trembled, but each page went back in the correct order. After replacing the loose board, I noticed a small wireless device attached beneath Daniel's desk. It was not a router or a computer accessory. The device was a hidden camera pointed directly toward the cabinet where I stored personal records. Another camera faced the hallway outside Ava's bedroom. Fear replaced every other emotion inside me. Until that moment, I had believed Daniel wanted my money and planned to leave quietly. The camera near my daughter's room suggested something darker, even if I did not yet understand its purpose. Ava had to be removed from the house before Daniel returned, but any sudden change could warn him that I knew the truth. I arranged for her to spend the night with my sister, using a school project as the reason. Then I packed copies of the most important records into my work bag and left the original evidence untouched. Daniel arrived home shortly before 7. From the kitchen, I heard him enter his office and move the filing cabinet. Several seconds passed before the floorboard shifted. He had discovered that someone had opened the folder. That was when I realized my careful plan had failed. Daniel now knew I was no longer blind. The sound from Daniel's office lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. Until that moment, I still had one advantage. He believed I trusted him, which gave investigators time to trace the accounts and verify the documents. Now the loose floorboard had exposed my search, and the silence upstairs felt more dangerous than shouting would have. I remained in the kitchen with my back toward the hallway. My work bag rested near the pantry, holding copies of the loan papers, photographs, travel itinerary, and spreadsheet of women. Ava was already safe at my sister's house, but Daniel did not know that yet. Several minutes passed before he came downstairs. His movements sounded calm and controlled. He placed his keys on the counter, opened the refrigerator, and walked behind me without touching anything. The familiar routine felt carefully rehearsed, as though he wanted me to believe nothing had changed. I kept rinsing the same glass while watching his reflection in the window. Daniel had always filled silence easily. That evening, he offered no explanation for his late arrival and asked nothing about Ava. His attention stayed on my work bag, then shifted toward the back door. I understood immediately that he was calculating how quickly I could leave. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. The investigator had instructed me earlier to send a blank message if I believed I was in immediate danger. I could not reach for the phone without making my fear obvious, so I waited until Daniel entered the living room. Then I slipped one hand into my pocket and sent the message without looking at the screen. Afterward, I carried the glass to the table and forced myself to sit. My heartbeat was so loud that I could barely hear the air conditioner. Every object in the room suddenly had 2 meanings. The heavy ceramic bowl could become a weapon. The deadbolt could keep someone outside or trap someone inside. Even Daniel's shoes near the stairs looked prepared for a fast departure. He finally moved toward the front windows and closed the blinds. That simple action confirmed what I already knew. He was no longer performing for me. Whatever happened next would happen without witnesses. Rather than waiting for him to control the situation, I stood and reached for my bag. Daniel stepped between me and the pantry before I could take another step. His expression remained strangely blank, but the softness I had trusted for 3 years was gone. I did not argue or accuse him. Instead, I told him Ava was spending the night elsewhere and explained that my supervisor expected me back at work for an emergency inventory review. The excuse sounded reasonable, yet Daniel knew my schedule well enough to recognize the lie. His eyes moved toward my pocket. At that moment, headlights passed across the front windows. Daniel turned slightly, and I used the distraction to move toward the back door. Before I reached it, he grabbed my wrist hard enough to make my fingers go numb. Fear sharpened every detail around me. The smell of takeout still lingered in the kitchen. Water continued running in the sink. Somewhere upstairs, the hidden camera was recording a room that suddenly felt like a crime scene. I twisted away and knocked the ceramic bowl from the counter. It struck the floor with a violent crash, buying me enough time to pull free. Daniel reached for my bag instead of chasing me, which told me exactly what mattered most to him. He wanted the evidence. The front door opened before he could take it. 2 county deputies entered with the investigator behind them. Daniel froze beside the pantry, still holding the strap of my work bag. For one brief second, his face showed something I had never seen before. Not fear. Recognition. He looked at the investigator as though they had met before. That realization disturbed me more than the arrest itself. Daniel was placed in handcuffs while officers searched the house under an emergency warrant. They recovered the black folder, hidden cameras, several phones, forged identification cards, and a laptop containing financial records under multiple names. By midnight, I learned that Rachel had not boarded the flight to Cancun. She had disappeared from her Florida condominium 3 days earlier. Authorities believed she had taken nearly $500,000 from the corporate accounts, leaving Daniel behind with the evidence and the debt. For the first time, I saw the truth clearly. Daniel had planned to destroy my life, but someone had betrayed him first. The following morning, the investigator showed me one recovered message from Rachel. It contained my home address, Ava's school schedule, and a final instruction that made my blood turn cold. If Daniel failed to leave Georgia, Rachel planned to come back for the documents herself. I did not return home after Daniel's arrest. Ava and I stayed with my sister while investigators searched the house, removed the cameras, and copied every digital record they could find. My daughter knew only that Daniel had committed financial fraud. I could not tell her that someone had tracked her school schedule or placed surveillance near her bedroom. Protecting her required more than keeping frightening details hidden. Within 48 hours, I froze every credit account connected to my name. I contacted the mortgage company, the loan servicer, 3 credit bureaus, and an attorney who specialized in identity theft. Each call forced me to repeat the same humiliating explanation. My husband had stolen my information. My marriage may not have been legal. My signature had been used to borrow money against my home. The lender temporarily paused the foreclosure process, but the pause was not forgiveness. Until investigators proved which documents were fraudulent, the debt still followed my name. Every missed payment damaged the credit history I had spent nearly 20 years protecting. My Army position also remained under review. Although my supervisor supported me, the security office needed complete financial disclosure. Unexpected debt could make an employee vulnerable to pressure, and vulnerability mattered in my work. I understood the policy, yet being examined like a possible risk made the betrayal feel even deeper. Daniel had not only stolen money. He had turned my honesty into something I had to prove. 3 days after his arrest, investigators confirmed that he and Rachel had targeted at least 4 other women. 2 had lost substantial savings, while another had sold her home to cover loans she believed belonged to a struggling family business. None of them had known the others existed. The spreadsheet had been their system for choosing victims. Property ownership mattered most. Stable income came next. Emotional history helped Daniel decide which version of himself each woman would trust. He became patient for cautious women, protective for frightened women, and ambitious for women who wanted a partner with direction. In my case, he became dependable. That realization hurt because it explained why the relationship had felt so natural. Daniel had not forced himself into my life. He had shaped himself around the empty spaces inside it. Rachel remained missing, and authorities believed she still had access to several accounts. The recovered message suggested she knew Daniel might fail, which meant she had prepared another plan. For safety, Ava's school changed her pickup permissions, and my sister's address was placed under patrol. Nothing about our lives felt private anymore. On Friday evening, I received a notification from the camera system at my house. Investigators had replaced the compromised equipment with secure devices, and motion had been detected near the back entrance. The live image showed a woman wearing a baseball cap and carrying a large purse. Even with half her face hidden, I recognized Rachel from the photographs. She did not approach like a burglar searching for an easy entrance. She walked directly toward the kitchen window, removed a key from her pocket, and unlocked the back door without hesitation. Daniel had given her access to my home. I immediately contacted the investigator and remained on the live feed. Rachel moved through the kitchen, entered Daniel's office, and pulled the filing cabinet away from the wall. When she discovered the floorboard was empty, her posture changed. She began searching violently. Desk drawers hit the floor. Papers scattered across the room. After several minutes, she carried a small safe from the closet and placed it on the desk. I had never seen that safe before. Using a code, Rachel opened it on her first attempt. Inside were envelopes of cash, additional identification cards, and a sealed plastic pouch. She ignored the money and removed the pouch immediately. Whatever it contained mattered more than everything else in the room. Deputies arrived before she reached the back door. Rachel ran upstairs, crossed the hallway near Ava's bedroom, and climbed through a window onto the garage roof. The camera lost sight of her for several seconds. By the time officers surrounded the property, she had disappeared into the wooded drainage area behind the house. The safe remained open. Later that night, an investigator called me with an update. The plastic pouch had fallen near the upstairs window during Rachel's escape, allowing officers to recover it. Inside was a flash drive containing copies of every fraudulent account, every target, and every transfer Daniel and Rachel had made. There was also a video file recorded only 2 weeks earlier. In the video, Daniel explained where the stolen money had gone and named the person controlling the largest hidden account. The name was not Rachel Bennett. It belonged to someone working inside the financial office at my Army installation. The name on the hidden account belonged to Marcus Hale, a senior payroll specialist who had worked at my Army installation for 11 years. I recognized him immediately. Marcus had processed employment verification requests, corrected salary records, and answered questions about benefit statements. We were not friends, but he knew where I worked, how much I earned, and which documents lenders usually requested. More importantly, he had access to systems Daniel could never have entered alone. That discovery explained how the fraud had moved so quickly. Investigators found that Marcus had altered verification dates, approved false requests, and sent private employment information to Daniel through encrypted accounts. In exchange, he received a percentage from every successful loan. My documents were not stolen only from a cabinet at home. Some had been recreated from records inside the office where I believed they were protected. Federal agents arrested Marcus before the end of the week. His arrest triggered a wider review across the installation. Several employees were questioned, access logs were preserved, and every request connected to my name was examined. For days, I feared the investigation would permanently damage my career, even though I had reported the fraud myself. Instead, the evidence confirmed that I had followed every required procedure. My security review was closed without disciplinary action. The second mortgage was canceled before any money was released, and the largest business loan was formally classified as fraudulent. After weeks of legal filings, the lender removed the claim against my house. The foreclosure notice was withdrawn on a rainy Monday morning. I sat inside my attorney's office holding the confirmation letter while relief moved through me so slowly that I almost did not recognize it. There was no dramatic celebration. My body had been surviving on fear for too long, and safety felt unfamiliar. Daniel eventually pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges involving identity theft, bank fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy. Rachel was arrested 6 weeks later after using a false passport at an airport in Texas. Investigators recovered part of the stolen money, although several victims never received everything they had lost. Marcus also accepted a plea agreement. Learning that all three of them would face consequences should have made me feel complete. Instead, justice felt quieter than I expected. Their arrests could stop the scheme, but they could not return the years I had trusted a man who had studied my wounds like a business opportunity. Ava struggled with the truth in her own way. She stopped mentioning Daniel completely and became uncomfortable whenever someone asked about him. I arranged counseling for both of us because silence had already protected too many secrets. Healing did not happen through one emotional conversation. It came through ordinary mornings, locked doors, honest questions, and the gradual return of routines. Several months later, we repainted the kitchen. The old pencil marks showing Ava's height remained beside the pantry. I nearly covered them, then decided to leave them untouched. Those marks reminded me that the house had never mattered only because of its financial value. It held proof that we had stayed, grown, and survived inside it. I also changed how I handled trust. Every financial document was reviewed by an attorney before I signed it. My credit remained frozen unless I personally needed access. Important records moved into a secure deposit box, and nobody received passwords simply because they claimed to love me. Those changes did not make me cold. They made me responsible for my own safety. For a long time, I blamed myself for signing the papers Daniel placed in front of me. I replayed that exhausted evening and wondered how someone trained to catch mistakes had missed the one that nearly destroyed her life. Eventually, I understood that manipulation works because it disguises danger as comfort. Daniel never asked me to trust him all at once. He earned small pieces, then used them to reach everything else. The experience cost me money, sleep, confidence, and a version of love I once believed was real. However, it also gave me something I had neglected for years. I learned that trust should never require blindness. Sometimes I still notice unfamiliar cars near the house and feel my body tighten. The fear passes faster now, but it never disappears completely. Perhaps that is the final thing Daniel left behind. Not terror and not bitterness. A warning I will never ignore again. Almost a year after Daniel's arrest, a letter arrived from the federal prison where he was serving his sentence. The envelope contained my full name in handwriting I recognized immediately. For several minutes, I left it unopened on the kitchen counter while rain moved softly against the windows. I had spent months rebuilding a life that no longer included his explanations, apologies, or carefully chosen versions of the truth. Opening that letter felt like giving him another entrance. By then, Ava and I had settled into a different rhythm. She had started high school, joined the photography club, and slowly stopped checking whether every door was locked before going upstairs. My position with the Army had become stable again, although the investigation permanently changed several security procedures at the installation. New identity verification safeguards were introduced because of what happened. Part of me felt proud that the case had exposed a weakness before more employees became victims. Another part remained angry that my life had to be nearly destroyed before anyone noticed the system could be manipulated from within. The letter stayed on the counter until evening. Eventually, I opened it because unanswered questions had controlled enough of my life. Daniel filled 6 pages with explanations about pressure, debt, Rachel's influence, and the fear that supposedly kept him trapped in the scheme. He described himself as someone who had made terrible choices rather than someone who had deliberately selected women to exploit. Not once did he mention the spreadsheet. He ignored the hidden cameras, the forged documents, and the notes describing my emotional history. Instead, he wrote about moments from our marriage as though pleasant memories could reduce the harm surrounding them. Reading his words, I finally recognized the same pattern that had worked on me before. Daniel still wanted control over the meaning of what happened. His letter was not an honest confession. It was another attempt to decide which facts deserved attention and which ones should disappear. The man who once shaped himself into everything I needed was now shaping his crimes into something he hoped I could forgive. I did not write back. The next morning, I placed the letter inside the evidence box stored at my attorney's office. Keeping it was not an act of attachment. It was a reminder that manipulation rarely announces itself with obvious cruelty. Sometimes it arrives through regret, shared memories, and carefully measured shame. Several weeks later, one of Daniel's other victims contacted me through her lawyer. Her name was Melissa, and she had been listed near the top of the spreadsheet. She had lost most of her retirement savings and carried deep embarrassment about ignoring the warning signs. Hearing her story showed me how closely our experiences mirrored each other, despite living in different states and meeting different versions of Daniel. We eventually joined two other victims in a civil case. The recovered assets could not replace everything, but the lawsuit gave us access to records that helped repair our credit and remove fraudulent claims. More importantly, none of us had to explain the entire nightmare from the beginning whenever doubt returned. Shame became weaker once it was shared honestly. On the first anniversary of Daniel's arrest, Ava and I planted a red maple in the backyard. We chose a place visible from the kitchen window, near the fence where investigators had once searched for evidence. The tree was small, uneven, and supported by two wooden stakes against the wind. Watching it stand there affected me more than I expected. For years, I believed strength meant carrying problems quietly and protecting everyone from my fear. That belief made me dependable at work, but it also made isolation feel normal. Daniel recognized that habit and used it against me. Survival required something different. I had to report the truth before I fully understood it. I needed help before I felt ready to receive it. Most painfully, I had to accept that loving someone did not make their behavior safe, and doubting them did not make me disloyal. The maple still bends during heavy storms. Each spring, however, its branches return stronger and slightly wider. When I see it from the kitchen, I remember the woman who signed 6 pages because she was exhausted, uncomfortable, and afraid of appearing suspicious. I do not hate her anymore. She trusted the wrong man, but she also found the courage to stop him. That difference saved my home, protected my daughter, and helped expose people who believed careful women could never become dangerous to their plans. Daniel once treated my trust like an unlocked door. He never expected me to be the person who finally closed it.